Welcome everyone. My name is Dave Donaldson, and along with David Atkin, we've been convening a series of PhD lectures on firms in development on behalf of BRED and IGC. And we want to thank you for joining us today for Lecture 3. Lecture 3 will be given by Jing. Jing is a professor of economics at University of Maryland and a genuine expert in this space of firms development, and is in fact currently the co-chair of the firm sector in the JPAL organization. So Jing's going to talk today about, as you can see, the theme of management and business training. So just briefly to kind of connect this to previous lectures and also to future lectures in this course, wanted to sort of highlight a couple things. So, in lecture 1, David and I, tried to organize a bit of introductory material on this topic around the sort of theme of understanding the technologies and the sort of techniques that firms use for sort of producing what they have given a fixed number of inputs. And then a sort of second matter of like, well, sort of, are firms getting the right inputs? And sort of that's a separate question. That's more to do with the misallocation of inputs across firms. So in lecture 2, Eric Verhoeven began sort of touching on the theme of kind of technology and techniques that firms use and sort of ways they can upgrade those techniques. And, by and large, Jing is going to continue that theme today, but more in the topic of kind of management and how we can sort of, attempt to improve, techniques into the theme of business training. And then starting tomorrow, we'll sort of dig more into the misallocation side of that organizing framework that I mentioned. So with that preamble done, nothing left for me to do other than hand it over to Jing. It's all yours. And thanks again for doing this, Jing.
Thank you, Dave, for the introduction, and thank you, David and Dave, for inviting me to give a lecture here. So today I'm going to talk about management and business training, and here is an outline of today's lecture. So in the first part, I'm going to give you some introduction to the management literature, and I'm going to talk about how to measure management and also show you some evidence about the impact of management on firm outcomes. And then in the second part of the lecture, I'm going to introduce some strategies and methodologies used in business training, show you evidence about evaluations on existing training programs, and then discuss some alternative approaches to the standard business training. And lastly, I'm going to summarize what we have learned and then discuss some open questions in this area. So as Dave said, from previous lectures, we have learned that there are large and persistent differences in productivity, both across firms and across countries. For example, in the US, firms in industries producing homogeneous goods, such as block ice and oak flooring, display 100% productivity spread between the 10th and 90th percentile. And this productivity dispersion appears even larger in developing countries. Specifically, the ratio of the 90th to the 10th percentile of the TFP is 5 in India and 4.9 in China. And while there can be many factors driving this productivity difference, one commonly cited reason for this difference is that in developing countries, the adoption of advanced management practices is very low, and there's a lack of managerial skills among business owners. So why people believe management could make a difference? So firstly, if we simply look at the correlation between management scores and country level GDP, there's obviously a positive correlation. And firm management spreads looks very much like TFP spreads. But even with those evidence, there's still like a wide debate on for a long time about whether management is important. So why there are some skepticism about the importance of management. So the first reason could be that profit maximization will lead firms to minimize costs. As a result, any residual variations in management practices will reflect firms' optimal response to like different market conditions that they're facing. So, for example, firms in developing countries may not adopt quality control systems because the wages there are so low that repairing defects is very cheap. As a result, their management practices are not bad, but it's just the optimal response to the low wages. So in other words, firms are making actually optimal choices about whether to use some management practices or not. And the second reason for the doubt is that because of the complexity of management, it's very difficult to measure management, and as a result, it's also difficult to evaluate the impact of adopting management practices on firm outcomes. Sorry, I forgot to say that. Feel free to unmute yourself and interrupt me if you have any questions. So in order to look into this issue, the first step would be to develop some tools to measure management. So Bloom and Verinen 2007 paper was among the first to develop survey tools to measure management practices. So they worked with over 300 firms in several countries like US, UK, France, and Germany. Those are very big companies with median size of firms of 600 employees. So in this project, they firstly developed management practice scoring system, and specifically they designed scorecards for 18 different management practices, and then conducted a 45 minutes phone interview with managers of those firms. And in order to get unbiased responses, they conducted a double-blind interview in that interviewers do not know the company performance before the phone interview, and also managers are not informed in advance that they will be scored on the management practices. And they also spend some effort in order to get firms to participate in the interview, including that they introduce this as a lean manufacturing interview, does not include any financial questions. And also the survey got endorsed by several government entities. So let me give you one example of how do they measure management in this survey. So one important element to measure here is the monitoring system, or in other words, how was performance tracked in a company. So there are scores ranging from 1 to 5. So company would receive a score of 1 if the measures tracked do not indicate directly if overall business objectives are met, and there are certain processes are not tracked at all. And companies would receive a score of a middle score of 3 if most of the key performance indicators are tracked formally, and this tracking is overseen by senior management. And they're going to receive a high score if performance is tracked, both tracked and communicated to employees in order to kind of facilitate further improvement based on the monitoring. So this is one example about their of their scorecard. And they did internal validation of the scoring by re-interviewing a subset of the firms with different interviewers and managers, and they find a high and a positive correlation. And after that, they use this management score to estimate the impact of management on several key firm level performance measures. And for this, they use some accounting data with a range of 11 years. So from this table, we can see that management seems to have significant and positive impacts on a range of firm outcomes. But one thing to note is that this is just a correlation study without any causality. But this correlation seems promising in the sense that we do see the management score has a positive impact on different types of firm outcomes. So with this, then researchers started to think about like how to identify the causal impact of management on firm outcomes. So for this, I'm going to talk in detail about Bloom et al. 2013 paper, which was the first experiment to field experiment to evaluate the impact of management practices on TFP and some other firm outcomes. So this experiment was implemented with 20 plants in large multi-plant firms in India. And they provided like management consulting services to the treated plants. And for the control plants, they only receive a 1 month diagnostic treatment, but without any consulting services. And they collected weekly data on all plants for 3 years from 2008 to 2010. So here are some like, let me go through their design in more detail. So the consulting services they provided was on 38 specific practices tied to factory operations, quality, and inventory control. And this consulting treatment has 3 phases. And the first phase is a diagnostic phase, and this lasts for 1 month. So, both the treatment group and control group received this phase. And in this step, they talk with the managers in each plant and ask them what kind of management practices are they using. So this is basically an evaluation of the current management practice used by each plant. And the second stage is the implementation phase, and this step took 4 months, and only the treatment group received this phase. And in those 4 months, the consultants introduced some key management practices to firm managers and encourage those managers to use those practices in their operation. And the last step is the measurement phase, in which they collected performance and management data from both the treated and control plants. And in the consulting intervention, they focused on 5 different areas of management. So I won't be going to all the details, but to give you some ideas of what are the types of practices they're introducing here. The first area is factory operation. So for example, whether there's like regular maintenance of machines and recording the reasons for breakdowns, and to learn from failures, and whether they establish standard procedures for operation. The second area is quality control, in which means they should record quality problems and analyze those records frequently. The third area is human resource management, which is obviously very important for their simple firms, as those are very big companies. And this includes to establish performance-based incentive system for both workers and managers, and to provide well-defined job descriptions and tasks for both workers and managers. And in addition to those, they also have an area of inventory, in which they encourage managers to keep clear records of inventory, and also to make like electronic version of the inventory records. And lastly, they also covered sales and order management, such as like to check production on an order-wise basis, and to use design-wise efficiency analysis so that pricing can be based on actual rather than average production cost. So those are what they covered in the consulting intervention. So their sample firms are textile companies with about like 100 to 1,000 employees. So with this criteria, they find 66 eligible firms. So they reach out to those firms, and then 34 of them expressed interest to participate in the project. And then by further talking with those 34 firms, 17 of those firms agreed to commit like senior management time to the consulting services. So in the end, they have it means they have a sample of 17 firms who are interested in participating in this program. Okay. So I want to take a pause here and ask you a question, which is about the sample here. So as explained here, they have a sample of 17 firms, and all those firms are like interested to join the consulting program. And would this induce any problem in the evaluation of this management of this consulting program? I saw one person raised hand. Barbara, can you unmute yourself?
You should be able to unmute yourself if you want to speak, if you have an answer to Jing's question. Yeah. Jing, you want to re-ask the question again, maybe?
Yeah, so my question is about the sample, the choice of sample here. So the study involves 17 big firms who agreed to who are interested in having their managers participating in the consulting intervention, and how would that influence the evaluation of this consulting program? So I see 2 participants raised their hands. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, hi. I think the 17 seems very low for this type of experiments, just because the units that is treated is the entire firm. So it seems like it's going to be hard to make convincing conclusion on a causality basis, I guess. And by the way, I'm Eva. Nice to meet you, and thank you for the conference.
Yeah, thanks, Eva. So so you mean like they have a small sample problem in that there are only like 17 participants. Very good. So that can be a problem, and I will discuss how did they solve the small sample issue. Are there any other thoughts on this? I saw many people raise their hand. There are 5 participants raised their hand, but I don't see all their names from the.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah. Yes, yeah, I can hear you. Mm-hmm.
I suspect there might be like a selection bias if you're only taking, 17 who have sort of agreed to be a part of the program out of, well, total of 66 firms. So, the results may be kind of biased, basically.
Very good. Yeah. So you guys mentioned exactly the two problems that I want to discuss here. So one issue here regarding about the sample is a selection bias. So in order to kind of deal with this issue, the authors surveyed some, also got some data on non-project firms, and they made a comparison between the project firms with non-project firms, but they did not find any significant difference in observed characteristics between those two groups. But we may still vary. There are selections driven by unobservables. And as you said, there can be and this can bias the results, and the bias can be either upward or downward. So for example, it can bias the result upward if firms that are more willing to participate can potentially gain more from the consulting treatment, and it can be also there can be also a downward bias if people with firms with the most to gain from the consulting services are also more skeptical about what the consultant is going to do and whether they're going to learn anything new from the treatment. But even with those problems, the results should still be policy relevant, because typically if government agencies or NGOs offer training or management consulting services to firms, they're going to rely on firms voluntarily participate in such programs. So this is the first issue, which is selection bias. And the second problem is the small sample problem, in that they only have 17 plants included in the study sample. But they have a small sample because the intervention is very expensive. So the cost is about 75K each treated plant, and this partially explains why there were no large firm management experiments before this project. Then the question is whether this sample is large enough to get some meaningful and significant results. So the authors try to deal with this small sample issue using several different strategies. And so, for example, the firms have a very similar type of production. They were located in the same areas. They're using the same technology in the baseline, so that most of the external shocks should be able to control with time dummies. And they also have very detailed and frequent data, high frequency data from machines and logs, so that there's very little measurement error. So this was to working with a homogeneous sample, get high frequency data and administrative data to measure outcomes helps to improve power. And in addition to that, they also used different strategies for statistical inference. So for example, they used bootstrap from cluster standard errors. They also used permutation tests to get test statistics, which does not rely on asymptotics. And lastly, they also used large T asymptotic from the 2009 paper. And all those three methods give very similar results. And those are some standard strategies to use if, for example, in your research there, you also face a small sample issue. Okay, so this figure plots the main results of the I guess the first main results of the paper, which looks at the impact of the consulting intervention on the adoption of management practices over time. So in this figure, they plot the adoption rate of the 38 management practices that were introduced in the consulting treatment, and they plot the adoption rate over time, like 10 months before the treatment and until like 1 year after the intervention for 3 types of plants. This includes the treated plants, the control plants, and the non-experimental plants in treatment firms. So by looking at this figure, what do you think we can learn from this result? I think maybe I can leave you 10 or 20 seconds to look at this figure and tell me what evidence is this figure showing. Samuel? Samuel, do you have a question, or do you want to answer my question?
Oh, here we go. Did that go through?
Yeah.
Nice. I'm Sam from Vanderbilt, 4th year. Thanks. It looks like there's definitely early adoption in the treated plants, but it also looks like there's spillover to other plants. Perhaps they're observing the increased productivity of their fellow competitors. It's also cool to see the spillovers within firms, so the non-experimental plants and treated firms. So it seems like adoption of new technologies, benefits everyone.
Thanks. Yeah, as Samuel said, firstly, the initial adoption, the baseline adoption of those practices are very low among all types of plants here. So we can see that before the intervention, the average adoption of those practices was below 30%. And then as we see, there's obviously a treatment effect, because once the intervention started, we see that treated plants significantly increased the adoption of those practices. But there's also spillover effects, as we also see an increase of adoption among non-experimental plants in treatment firms. So this could be driven by the fact that managers in those non-experimental plants learned from the managers of the treated plants. Any other evidence that you noticed from this figure? So another evidence I want to mention here is that although we see an increase in the adoption among the treatment plants, you might notice that the adoption rate is not 100%, right? So about 1 year after the intervention, the treated plants adopted about 60% of the practices that were introduced. And when we look at what types of practices did they adopt, those firms appears to adopt the practices that were the easiest to implement, or had the largest perceived short-run payoffs, such as practices related to daily quality, inventory, and efficiency review meetings. So they are actually making choices among the management practice introduced, and chose the ones that are more relevant for them. I think someone have a question. There are 2 questions. Can you, can you unmute yourself directly? And
so we're having a problem unmuting ourselves. So I'm promoting them to a panelist so that they'll be able to do that, because attendees typically aren't able to. So if you accept the panelist invitation, then you should be able to make your comments. Hi, Susan, we can hear you.
Oh, hi. I wondered if there was how much variance there was among the treatment plants in terms of their rate of adoption of these various practices. Perhaps that's something you're going to come on to.
Yeah, so I don't have the exact number here, but there are some variations, but not huge variations among the treated. So in general, for majority of the treated plants, there's a significant increase in the adoption. Are there any other questions? Oh, I think there are two more questions.
Okay, can you hear me? And
yes.
Okay, thank you. One question on issues related to the cost of adopting those practices, because as you rightly mentioned here, the treatment effect after seemingly after 6 months is declining in rate. So it seems that the cost matters. I mean, adopting those practices depends on how costly those practices are. So can you tell us something they did about the cost of adopting those practices? Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess the standard kind of types of cost of adopting practices would include like it takes time for managers and workers to get used to the new practices, right? So there might be some short-run negative impacts on productivity. Yeah, so you're right there. That might be one reason of like why they are. I mean, a lot of the firms are choose to adopt practices that are easy to implement, right? Yeah. And when you say that the treatment effects decreases over time, it's actually driven by the fact that some of the control plans started to also adopt some of the practices, but among the treated plants, the increase in the adoption was actually persistent, at least 1 year after the treatment. Any other questions? Let me take one more question and then let's move on.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah.
So just a small question about the non-experimental plants in treatment firms. Like how do we explain the trend in these plants? Like, is this some sort of a spillover effect, or like how come they're having adoption rates which are increasing with the number of months after the treatment, and they're kind of exceeding the control plants in the end? So just a bit confused about that.
Yeah, the others actually looked exactly at specifically at the 5 non-experimental plans in which they see adoption of some of the practices, and they show that this increase occurred because the directors of the treatment plans copied the new practices from their experimental plans over to their other plans. So meaning that there are like higher level like managers who supervise both plants, so they see the effectiveness of those practices in treated plants, so that they encourage adoption in the non-experimental plants.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so so the previous figure shows basically a very strong first stage in that the consulting intervention actually increased adoption of management practices. In the second part of the paper, they then estimate the impact of these improved management practices on a comprehensive set of firm outcomes. And the key outcomes include some a quality outcome, which is measured by the quality defects index, an inventory measure, output, productivity. So they firstly do intent to treat estimation, in which they regress outcomes on a dummy variable, indicating whether a plant received the treatment or not. And they show that the intervention has a big and significant impacts on improving the quality of the products and output and TFP. And then they do OS and IV estimation, but the results are in general consistent with intent to treat effect. So the results so far shows that those managers in large firms are actually thoughtful. Like if they explain advanced management practices to them, they are willing to adopt, and the adoption of those practices seems to be beneficial to their firms. So then one question is why those firms did not improve themselves? Like why did they use those practices before the intervention? So there can be two reasons depending on the types of management practices that we think about. So there can be some like common practices that a lot of firms already know about those practices, but the reason why they did not adopt, they did not use it could be like they underestimated the potential benefits of doing so. And for some other management practices, maybe there's a lack of information issue, like managers did not know like the existence of those practices, so that they were unable to do it by themselves. Any question about this? I saw two people raise their hands.
Hi, my name is Michelle Brock. I just, thanks also from my side on your lecture today. Quick question about the outcomes. In previous lectures, one of the questions around upgrading and how firms manage upgrading is whether or not they achieve it with staff turnover, or if it's just kind of training and improving things. So I was wondering if Bloom and the co-authors looked at layoffs or turnover to figure out, aside from this know-how issue, whether or not firms were achieving these improved outcomes as a result of either upgrading individual staff members or just getting rid of the people, either they voluntarily leave or they're fired, which sometimes consulting teams will tell you to fire people, for example. So did they look at
that's a very good, yeah, that's a very good question. So I don't think they looked at outcomes like turnover. Yeah, that might be some interesting thing to explore. Yeah, but turnover actually matters for the longer term impacts of the project. So I think that the others actually come back to those plans maybe almost 10 years after less than 8, maybe 8 years after the intervention to see whether there's lasting effects. But they find that most of the treated firms stopped using those new management practices, and the primary reason is that there's a lot of turnover among managers. So once the treated managers leave, the new manager stopped using the practices adopted before. Was there another question? Victor?
Hi, Professor. Hi. Just a quick question. I was wondering if, in this case, it's possible to think that the treated firms can outcompete the control firms. So I don't know if that can be like an issue in this type of experiments.
So you mean like whether competition could drive out the bad managed firms? Is that your question?
Yes, you can have some exit and some real towards the high productivity firms that are the ones that are in the treated group.
Yeah, actually, that's a question that I want to talk about next. So, as you said, like if there are some firms with good management practices, whether no, like whether if there's like sufficient competition, right? Essentially, those firms with bad management practices should be competed out of the market if those management practice can truly improve firm outcomes. So I guess that did not happen in this context because some like very context specific reasons. So one reason that's discussed in detail in the paper is that there's very limited decentralization among those sample firms, and specifically the owner in most of those sample firms. The owner of the firm take almost all decisions because there's lack of trust on mid-level managers. They work for a long time every week, and because they did not like trust other people making decisions. And only in this case, like only members of the only family can have positions with some like real decision-making power. And this is mainly driven by the weak rule of law in India. And because of this, what influences firm size is the main factor influencing the size of firm is the number of male family members, rather than factors such as management scores. And so, and this lack of trust issue substantially limited the potential growth of those families, of those firms. And as a result, those unproductive firms are likely able to still survive because more productive firms cannot expand. And for the same reason, entry is also limited. So this answers like why those badly managed firms were not drive out of the market by competition. Barbara, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. So I wanted to ask if perhaps the cost of adoption could be one reason why these firms, when left to themselves, are not adopting some of these practices, or if the cost of practices are just zero. I don't know if it's clear.
Yeah. You are talking about like whether cost of adoption is one reason of why they're not using all the practices.
Yes. Oh, yeah, it's.
Right. I think someone asked a similar question before. There's obviously some costs of adopting a new practice, and I believe that can be one reason of why they are not using all those new practices. And actually, that is showing in the data that most firms choose to use the practices that can be like cheapest or easiest to implement. So I think you're right that this can be one reason of why like there's no 100% adoption among the treated firms. Any other questions? Okay, so what we have learned so far includes the fact that there's very big heterogeneity in management practices, and better managed firms seems to perform better, and management practices can be improved with interventions, and improving management practices could generate positive impacts on firm outcomes. So far, both of those the papers we have discussed focus on very big firms, but a majority of the labor force in low-income countries is employed in much smaller enterprises with fewer than 5 workers, or some of them even do not have any employees. So the next question is, even if management matters for big companies, whether it actually matters for those like smaller micro enterprises in developing countries. So firstly, the management practices that's used in small firms can be very different from what I have shown before. So some examples of practices used for small firms include to separate household and business accounts, monitoring inventory, record keeping, financial planning, and marketing, meaning whether they use discounts or like better prices to attract clients. So the existing literature shows that even smaller firms, if they use better management practices, they can grow faster and can be more productive. But similar as the case that we observed in bigger firms, most of those small firms fail to adopt better management practices. And the most popular approach to like encourage smaller firms to adopt management practices is by business training, which will be our next topic. So maybe let me pause a bit here and see if there's any questions that I think I should answer in the Q&A.
Hi, we've had a few, but there's been a bit of a break, I think, since the last ones were asked. So I'm not sure how far back you want to go right now, but I think there is one live if you want to do that also.
Sure.
Hi, so it's Michelle again. One of the things that comes to mind when we're talking about the turnover problem is that there's a negative externality for firms on what they spend on training. So they train somebody and then that person can leave. So, and if training is not offered widely across all firms, then it's not a cost the firm necessarily wants to bear. Business schools can be one way for the government to address that, either to put some of the training cost on the individual worker or some of it on the government. And I'm wondering if anybody in the management literature, aside from the business training stuff, or maybe that's where it is, has looked at, you know, the role that business schools or other types of institutions play for helping to solve some of these problems. Thanks.
Yeah, there's definitely some papers on that, and I believe some more are in the reading list that I shared on the website. So, for example, there are papers discussing, like, for example, as you said, because of the turnover issue, right? If you train someone and they quit, that would generate a cost on the company. So that there's, for example, studies looking at different types of trainings. So, for example, there are training programs which teaches skills that can be used in general, like even if they move, they can apply the skills they learned in other companies. But there's also training which is more specific to the products or tasks that's needed for the current employer. And compare the cost effectiveness of those different types of trainings. And I'm happy to send you the specific papers on this if you are interested.
Thanks.
Yeah. Hello.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my name is Idrisi from Ghana, and I have a question on why the firms were not, what do you call it, involving themselves in the intervention. And you raised one of the first point was that, like, it could be that the firms they're aware about the intervention, but they think it might not be profitable to them. And the second one was maybe they don't have the information about it. So my question now is,
hello.
Sorry, Idrisia, I think we lost you. We'll give you a sec, but if not, I know Tashom has had his hand up for a while.
then should I move on or should I wait? Or
having known maybe the firms, it might
oh
not
yeah,
be
I can hear you
complicated
now.
to them. Someone who is not having the information about the intervention, and also
I think he just dropped off entirely. So maybe let's,
Okay. Yeah.
you can move
So
on.
yeah, if you rejoin, you can re-ask the question.
sorry, I lost my network. I'm back.
Okay.
Okay, sorry, I lost my question was, how can we separate firms that are not having information about the intervention, and also those who have information about the information but are not willing to participate? It's very complex to handle here. So, I mean, as a researcher, how can you handle that in your analysis?
Oh, so you mean how did they figure out some firms do not have the information about the practice?
Yes.
I guess there must be some survey questions at the baseline asking like whether you know this practice.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. So given the time, let's continue with our second topic, which is business training. So because with the evidence that better management practices could improve firm outcomes, there's a lot of business training programs provided in both developing and developed countries, especially developing countries. And so to give you some sense of like how many training programs are there, at least $1 billion is spent annually on business training programs in developing countries. And because the vast majority of firms in developing countries are microenterprises, and those microenterprises are an important source of income for many poor households, so a majority of those training programs are offered to microenterprises. And the most prevalent forms of business training aims to help potential entrepreneurs to start firms and also to help those already running those firms earn more income. But with this, there are still like different types of training programs provided to achieve this goal. So the first type listed here, which will be the focus of our lecture, is the traditional training programs, which aims to teach a package of different business practices. The second approach attempts to like simplify the training by teaching a few rule of thumb or the most relevant or important practices. And the third type is more different. So rather than attempting to teach firm owners how to carry out specific practices, it aims on changing the aspirations and mindset of business owners. And such personal initiative training has shown some promise in improving performance through creating a more proactive mindset. So in this lecture, I'm going to focus on the first type of training, which is traditional small business training provided to microenterprises. And specifically want to discuss like show you evidence on whether business training can improve business outcomes, and also how to improve the cost effectiveness and delivery of such training programs. So the classroom-based training is in basic like business practices is the most common approach to training small-scale enterprises entrepreneurs. And although there's a wide variety of classroom business training programs and approaches, a typical program involves a trainer teaching a group of 15 to 40 participants over a period of 3 to 12 days. So there can be courses for potential entrepreneurs, which focuses on like topics like generating a business idea, how to generate a business idea, how to develop a business plan, how to get permits, and how to do pricing and budgeting. There's also courses for owners of existing firms who looks to like grow further, And such programs normally cover topics such as record keeping, accounting, marketing, human resource, and hiring workers, and operations management. So because there's a large number of such training programs provided, there's also a big number of evaluations on this type of training. So here, let me give you one example of the randomized evaluations of such training program, which is the Demant et al. 2014 paper. So in this paper, the authors conduct randomized experiments in Sri Lanka to test the impact of business training. And the program they're evaluating was the ILO's SIYB training program, which is the most commonly used program worldwide. But in this project, they not only included training, but also have a treatment arm of introducing the training, and at the same time provide grants in order to help firms implementing some of the practices. And for the sample, they not only include existing business, but also potential entrepreneurs, so that they can look at like whether the impact is different on those two types of groups. And they also measure outcomes using like multiple follow-ups in order to increase statistical power and to look at the dynamics of the effect. So this table shows you the findings about the impact of those training programs on the adoption of business practices. So they show that for both the training only and the training plus cash grant groups, they see that there's a significant increase in the adoption for both groups. So this again, similar as the Bloom et al. Paper, shows that the business training can actually improve business owners' knowledge about those practices, and as a result, increase the adoption rate. But when we look at the impact on from outcomes, and in this case, I'm showing you a figure which illustrates the impact on profit, where you see that there's there are three lines here plotting the real monthly profit months after the intervention for the control group, the training only group, and the training plus cash program. So this figure shows that there are some increases at the beginning, but then there's no persistent effect. And we look at the point estimation, the impact on profit was not statistically significant. So this actually, this kind of results is very typical of many of the evaluations on similar types of business training programs, in that people see significant improvements in some measures of business practices, but they don't see a significant impact on sales or profits. And in many cases, the magnitude of impacts on sales or profits was not small, but it's just like the sample size is not big enough to detect a significant impact. So in this figure, which is from the McKinsey 2020 paper, they summarize the impact of training programs on sales from different studies. So if we look at the numbers here, you see that if we look at those studies separately, we see that the confidence intervals of the impact of training in many of those studies are very large and include 0. And again, as I said, this is because most of those studies do not have sufficient statistical power to detect effects of these magnitudes. Moreover, there seems to be a big heterogeneity in the magnitudes of findings found in different training programs provided in different contexts. So McKinsey 2020 estimates a random effects meta-analysis and find that training has a significant positive average effect on both profits, which is the 10% increase, and also on sales in which it can increase sales by about 4.7%. Then the question is, why doesn't traditional training have a larger effect, especially given the big cost incurred in those training programs? So this is mainly driven by 2 issues. The first one is that the low adoption rate of practices after training, so that many firms after training, they did not actually adopt those practices, or even if they adopt, but it's not like persistent, the adoption was not persistent. And the second issue is that there's a lot of variation in the quality of training and the selection of participants. And because of this McKinsey estimate might be upper bound of the average effects of training programs, because those studies included here are all training programs. A lot of them are designed by researchers and were implemented carefully. So overall, the quality of those training programs can be higher than the average. So this incurs another question, like how can we, which is a question about targeting, like how can we find the appropriate training programs for the right set of participants to kind of improve the cost effectiveness of the training program. So here I actually want to have a little discussion here. So if possible, I want to hear some of your ideas about how to improve targeting when implementing such business training programs. You guys have any ideas about how can we improve the targeting here?
Hello.
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
So one thing I was wondering, like, is there a sense of some local market-based targeting? Like, I, as a firm owner, if I think that my competitor is sort of like doing something and that may have some positive effect, I would be more motivated to do it as compared to just somebody coming up to me and trying to sort of like, change my old practices, which I might be reluctant because of inertia or any other reason. Sort of like just targeting at a sort of like a, not the unit is not sort of like a firm, but some sort of like defined local market. Is that a thing? Like, has people tried that?
Yes. I'm actually going to show you some evidence on that. This is like one kind of alternative training methods. So instead of like a classroom training, there's also programs that provide like peer interactions or like mentoring programs, which may be able to give firms more information that's specifically relevant for their business. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. If I may come in, also in terms of, it's one thing to train an individual, but how much impact does homophily have in the selection of a cohort of training? Because there's also the network effect, there's also the peer learning aspect that becomes very critical when it comes to entrepreneurs. So the exposure to the right kind of network, is that one route to targeting as well?
Yeah. Victor and Luis.
Yeah, I was wondering about the targeting. What about some type of vouchers system where you allow the people to, they have a budget, the entrepreneurs, and they can spend in the type of training that they think it's better for them.
Oh,
it's
I see.
like
so you mean like do not? Yeah. So you mean like do not make the training free, right? That's
no. In some way that it's gonna be free for them, but they're gonna choose the type of training that they think is more effective for them.
So let people choose the programs that they want to participate.
Yep.
Luis?
Hi.
Hello.
Oh, can I go?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I was thinking, I don't know how feasible this is, but what comes to mind is an analogy with agricultural extension. As far as I know, when you're trying to diffuse best practices in agriculture, right? Usually people self-select, but because it's in this, I'm thinking of smaller communities, like the other people who didn't choose to be part of it can see whether it works or not, and then slowly, but if it works, and like they will eventually adopt it, especially because they trust each other. I mean, they know each other, and even though, let's say, manufacturing and other more urban settings, it's not exactly the same. In my some sectors, we could take advantage of the fact that some industrial sectors are clustered geographically. Like, let's say, like, I mean, I'm from Lima, Peru. Like, they're like most of the textiles are in this particular place. So maybe you could, maybe it wouldn't be impossible to do something like that. Like, you could like open up for certain firms, and then those who didn't apply may later see that those new practices are actually paying off, and then slowly adopt it, something like that. Thank you.
Yeah. I think you mentioned a very interesting and important idea, which is to think about whom should we choose to provide the training, right? So maybe selecting someone that the firms trust would be like helping to improve the effect. And another related idea is that relying on like institutions like agricultural extensions, they might have better knowledge about like the local farms and who might be benefiting from such training programs. So using this local information might also be helpful in improving the targeting. Let's take one more and then we'll move on.
Yeah.
Hi.
Yeah. So my name is Idris Salifu from Ghana again. So we can also use effective communication packages to improve the value of the training. For example, nowadays people are adopting what you call message framing to change the people's perception towards the value of the training. And I think if you also adopt that, it can also improve the target. Yeah.
Very good. So all those are very interesting ideas to improve training. And I think so. You mentioned many of those that I listed here, including using community information and maybe use like a price to elicitate the willingness to pay for the training. And also there are projects exploring whether machine learning can be used to improve the targeting. And another question here is like how can we move to the like market solutions in providing the training programs, because almost all of those existing RCTs are providing trainings for free, but there can be a lot of issues of doing so, including the fact that this might not be sustainable in the longer term, and this could also potentially crowd out market providers of business trainings. And so I guess there are some projects looking at like whether price can be used as a screening mechanism, in that whether those who are willing to pay more prices could be those that have higher returns. So this can be used as a strategy to screen training participants. Okay, so far we talked about the most traditional type of training, which is the classroom training. So this type of like traditional training have the advantage of like it can reach a lot of audience and maybe easier to be scaled up in different contexts. But there are also some limitations of such programs. So, for example, there can be like limited adaptability of the training content to individual business. And in that sense, maybe providing like mentoring programs and peer interactions could improve that, as it might help firms to learn information that's more relevant to their business. And the second issue is that it's very costly to deliver training in classroom settings. And because of the things like travel costs, it could be inconvenient for entrepreneurs to attend. So I'm going to show you evidence of some alternative delivery mechanisms, such as online training, training through SMS messages and voice messages. So firstly, let's look at offering peer training or mentoring programs as a different training strategy. So I'm going to talk about two papers here. The first one is the Brooks et al. 2018 paper, which conducted a field experiment in Kenya slums with young and female micro-entrepreneurs. So the main treatment is that the treated business owners were randomly assigned to meet with successful local business owners. So those mentors are twice as profitable as they compared with the average, and 10 years more with 10 years more experience. And in order to compare these types of mentoring program with the standard traditional training programs, they also have a treatment arm in which they offered the standard business training classes, and then they compare this with both the control group and the mentoring program. And specifically, they want to ask whether the training, whether the mentoring program could improve outcomes, and who benefit more from such programs, and whether this mentoring program could be better than the traditional classroom training. So they have about 378 business owners in the sample, which were randomized into 3 groups, like the control, the classroom training, and the mentoring group. The classroom treatment is very similar as the traditional business training programs that we have described, which includes 2-hour classes each week and lasts for 4 weeks. And for the mentorship treatment, the mentees were told to meet with the mentors weekly for 4 weeks. And the mentors were chosen to match the mentee business type, so that the mentor and mentee are working on the same industry. But conditional on the business type, mentees were randomly assigned to mentors. And they did a follow-up 6 months after the intervention to evaluate the impacts. So the main findings of the paper is that there's a big short-term impacts of the mentoring program on firm performance, in that it increased profit of mentees by about 20%. But in contrast, there's no significant impact generated by the traditional classroom training program. However, while they see a big effects in the short term, the effects actually disappeared about a year after the intervention. And when they look at the reason of this diminishing results, they find that once they stop providing incentives to the mentors, it's very hard for them to maintain this mentor-mentee relationship. And because the market information changes over time, so once the mentees lost the connections with their mentors, they no longer have access to the relevant information. And this is why they don't see any effects in the longer term. So different from the mentorship program, firms may also be able to improve their business and management practices through learning from each other. So this is what the next paper that I'm going to talk about, trying to estimate. So this is a paper of my written with my colleague Adam Seidel, in which we organized monthly business meetings for randomly selected groups of managers in China. So we have a sample of 2,800 young firms interested in business meetings, and we randomized them into either a treatment or control group. In the treatment group, we have 1,480 randomly selected managers, And those people were randomized into small business groups with about 10 managers each. So for each of those business groups, they are expected to meet with their group members once a month for a year. And those meetings were very intensive in that all the group members would visit the firm of a group member and then spend hours discussing business issues there. And for the control group, there were no business groups formed and no business meetings. So let me show you the impact of the meetings on firm performance. So in this figure, we show the impact on three main outcomes: sales, employment, and the profit. And here the blue part shows you the change in control firms in midline and endline, and the red area shows you the additional change in traded firms. So basically, it tells us that the meeting seems to be overall beneficial in that we see big and significant improvements in all those three outcomes. And we also see that there's a big improvement in management scores, indicating that participating in meetings might facilitate learning from each other and improve the management skills. But in order to more specifically identify the mechanism of learning from peers, we did additional information experiment in which we distributed information to randomly selected managers about two products. The first product is a funding opportunity for the firm, which is a cash grant of up to 200,000 RMB. So this is actually a big grant for this size of the size of our sample firms. And this opportunity is highly competitive because each year, only around 150 firms are selected to receive funding. The second product is a saving opportunity for the manager, which offers an annual return of almost 7%. It's also limited in supply, but much less salient. So the key difference between those two products is that the first product is more competitive, and the first product is for the firm, while the second product is for the business owners themselves. So we then created a variation across groups in the share of informed managers, and we want to look at the diffusion of the information among group members depending on the types of product and also the degree of competitiveness. So in order to measure the degree of competitiveness, we asked the managers who are their competitors in the group so that we can create an indicator for groups being competitive or not. So we find a very interesting result in that there's information diffusion of both types of products, but the diffusion was much weaker for the product that's relevant for the firms if there are a lot of competitors in those groups. While we don't see similar heterogeneity by the degree of competitiveness for the saving product, which is less competitive, and for the business owners. So this tells us that peers can actually learn from each other, but there's more learning if they are not directly competing with each other. So to further explore what kind of group composition could maximize the positive impacts of peer interaction, we randomized firms into different types groups. And this includes some homogeneous groups where firms are having similar size and in the same industry, and also some kind of heterogeneous group where they have different size and in different industry. And in this figure, we show you the evidence of the impact of having 10% larger peers on for firm performance. And we show that interacting with larger peers, mainly firms that have bigger size, could generate a bigger impact of the meetings program. And I would say that the program is very cost effective, as the average profit gain is about 5 times of the manager's wage cost of participating in those meetings. But a few key things generated like the success of the program, including firstly, there's a selection of sample in that we only included firms that indicate that they're interested in participating in such business groups. And the second one is that peer quality matters, as we see that those peers interaction is more effective in improving firm outcomes if they have better performing peers in the group, and also who are not direct competitors to their own business. And lastly, the meeting's intensity is also important, as it's important for them to meet frequently so that they can establish trust on each other, so that they can start sharing information and also establish partnership with each other. So what we have learned from those 2 papers is that it seems like the matching with the right peers is important. As I said, the peer interaction can be more effective in improving communication if firms are matched with similar but better peers who are not close competitors. But both papers actually indicate that peer learning may not happen automatically. Like you need to provide some incentive, for example, for the mentors to provide information to mentees. And also in this peer interaction paper, those firms also need some incentives to participating in the program so that they can start peer interaction. Okay, so another type of alternative training strategy is by some like online interactions or through messages, through SMS messages or voice messages, and this have the advantage that they can like greatly reduce the cost of providing the training, and also reduce the cost for participants to attend the training. So there are 2 papers that I'm showing here, which use SMS messages and voice messages to deliver training. So for the first one, Cole et al. 2019 paper, they sent weekly voice messages to farmers in India, and they find modest improvements in business practices, but there's no significant changes in the firm outcomes. And the second paper worked with mobile money agents in Tanzania and sent daily personalized recommendations on inventory levels, but find no impacts. There's not much other like studies on this area yet, so I guess although the existing evidence does not show any like promising results of such strategies, but maybe more projects is needed in order to see like whether there's better ways to deliver such strategy. And lastly, especially with the COVID pandemic, like everyone use meetings via do meetings via Zoom. Another question is like whether we can do online training, which obviously would reduce the cost substantially. So there's one paper on this. To give you one example on this, this is a paper by Jing and Sun 2021 paper, in which they actually carried out a very big scale experiment with over 700,000 sellers on the largest e-commerce platform in China, in which they randomized 1/4 of those firms to offer task-based online training. And they show that taking up the training increases sales significantly by about 6.6%. But as I said, there's very limited study in this area yet. So more analysis is needed in order to see like whether the impacts can be different across contexts, and maybe the best way to kind of implement online training can be also context specific. Okay, let me, given the time, let me quickly summarize, and then hopefully we will have a couple of minutes for last set of questions. So what we have learned in this, the main things that we learned in this lecture includes, firstly, different size of firms seems to can be like a benefit from adopting management practices. And second, the traditional business training programs has a modest but significant impacts on improving management and outcomes for small firms. However, the impact is very heterogeneous across sample and contexts. And given this, it's important to find out like ways to target the right set of participants and also to like innovate the content and delivery methods for business training. But there are also some like open questions in this area, including, for example, how to improve the targeting of training, how to match appropriate training programs to specific entrepreneurs. How can we improve the cost effectiveness of training? For example, could online training programs offer like promising impacts on business outcomes? And in addition to that, why firms will not adopt beneficial business practices even after training? And lastly, how can we make markets for training work better? Yeah, that's all I have. And let's see if there are any questions.
May I?
Geeta?
Yeah. Are there any studies, which kind of explore the duration of training? Right. Quite often we send someone for a one-day training program, and it's too short a time to impact because training has to lead to behavior change over time. So a comparison between training programs that are like shorter versus some that are slightly more longer. Do you think that is a variable that can be studied?
Right. So among the evaluations that I showed in the summary table, I believe there's a lot of variation in the duration of training. But I'm not aware of any paper specifically randomizing the duration of training.
Thank you.
Tasshol?
Yes, thank you. I'm Shomel from Ethiopia. Thank you for the nice presentation. Yes, I went to I wanted to share my realization that just for the large firms that the level of adoption of management practice is widely seen and have a great impact. But for small firms, just as we see that just the level of business training impact is, but targeting, especially with peer quality and meeting intensity, have give a large quality. In addition to that, just small firms usually have a low access to finance, so that in addition to cash grants, shall we consider or is financial access or borrowing is considered with this research? That is what I wanted to raise.
Yeah, of course. So I guess firms. Lack of adoption of management practice is not the only growth barriers for firms, right? So there are a lot of other barriers such as credit constraint, as you mentioned. So you're right. In some cases, maybe combining those programs could make things more effective. So I'm not sure if we can still take one more question, or should we stop here?
Okay, yeah, you cannot take my question.
Okay.
Can I go ahead and can I ask my question? Yeah, so this is wonderful presentations. And in your presentation, I learned two things. We have realized that, training, it really, brings about effective, changes in firms' performance. And also, we have also realized that when you don't adopt the right procedure of it, sometimes the firms might not, or for example, the case study you presented from Kenya. So my question now is, having known the importance of training, what are the motivations that we can use to improve, or to ensure that at least firms enter into training programs?
Sorry, can you repeat your question? Well,
yes,
how to encourage, you mean how to encourage firms to participate?
Yes, so how to encourage, firms to participate in training programs.
Can I?
Yeah, so
sorry.
I get, sorry.
Yes, someone wanted to ask something to my question. Or my question is that, we have presented to us and we have now gotten to know that, training programs really impact in firms' performance. But sometimes too, if the right, procedures are not put in place, it can discourage firms to not participate. And sometimes you even highlighted some of the reasons why they did not participate was maybe they did not see any profit in that. So my question now is, what motivations can we put in place to encourage firms to participate or to enter into training programs?
Yeah. So I guess there are two issues here. Firstly, like whether we should encourage all types, every firm to participate, right? And the answer is obvious no, because so some firms do not have the potential to succeed even with the training, right? And that's relates with the question about targeting, right? How can we target the right set of firms to train? And among those targeted firms, there can be some of them are not interested in the training, and so the question is how can we motivate them? And I can see strategies that has been used so far includes, for example, to reduce the cost of training, making access to training easier, and maybe also to use peers, right? As I think one of the students said, if you see some of your peer firms participating in training or adopting some practices, it might give you yourself more incentive to do so.
Okay, thank you.
Great, we should probably wrap up there. Should we just remind everyone, thank you very much, Jing. That was a wonderful lecture. Tomorrow's lecture is at 11:30 EST, which is at 4:30 UK time. So just a reminder, the time's different just for tomorrow's lecture, which is on misallocation by Pete Clennow. So we really hope you'll all join us there. And Jing, thank you once again for giving such a wonderful lecture to everyone today.
And my pleasure. Thanks everyone for participating.